The Marines? We left Marines behind?
It's a shocking accusation. Did our government leave the precious remains of fallen World War II heroes on a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific?
No reaction.
And what may be even more disturbing, there could still be hundreds more. Tonight, a WUSA 9 special report, The Fallen and Forgotten. Leave no man behind. It's a motto from the armed forces, and it's a sacred promise, but one that was broken. Marines, sailors, and airmen from World War II are still left in unmarked graves. They fought on the tiny island of Tarawa. That's about 7,000 miles away from D.C., right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We sent our Mike Valerio there, and tonight, on the anniversary of the Battle of Tarawa, he'll share the results of what's turned out to be a 7-month investigation. And he'll also share some behind-the-scenes moments of his amazing journey.
It's a trip that took us 7,000 miles, 22 hours, and halfway around the world. This is Tarawa, a group of islands in the middle of the Pacific, frozen in time. It's where we fought against the Japanese in World War II, and the wreckage of war is everywhere. But on this sandbar, only the size of the National Mall, we discovered the forgotten story of Howard Brisbane. Howard was a Navy sailor who became a medic after Pearl Harbor. He waded through this very lagoon to what seemed like a small speck, the farthest from home he'd ever been. They called it 1 square mile of hell, and it's here where Howard died, killed by a Japanese sniper. Today, Howard's buried here at Arlington National Cemetery, but that wasn't always the case. In fact, he was found only 2 years ago, still on the island. Why? Because our country forgot about him. This is a rare photo of how our fallen are found on Tarawa, and only feet from this U.S. Marine was Howard's skeleton, found in 2015. His bones buried underneath his green poncho. The men who fought on Tarawa are only now being excavated, and we were there to witness it. You see, Howard's story is part of what many consider to be a forgotten promise. 73,000 Americans are still missing to this day, killed in World War II and never found. To put that in perspective, that's like 100 acres of Arlington National Cemetery are simply gone. All of these graves vanished. On Tarawa alone, 452 service members have never been found. It takes a toll on families to this day. You can see it for yourself.
They still there? We left these guys behind? The Marines? We left Marines behind? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. To see this?
We did not know. We did not know.
It's unbelievable.
This is Howard's oldest nephew, John, and we just told him, along with Howard's living relatives, that no one knew where the sailor's grave was for 70 years. No one could find it until now.
I was shocked that they really didn't know where he was all these years.
So why was Howard missing? You see, for generations, Howard's family thought he was buried here, a place on Tarawa with white crosses and white beaches, a paradise in the Pacific. But this is the reality. Pig pens and trash pits. Americans are buried in a trench just to the left, only a few feet away. Defense Department documents show that Americans were the ones who first cleared Howard's gravesite, all to expand an airbase. And only days after Howard died, his grave became a parking lot. The military never told his family. We did.
There was a memorial that's now gone, and the cemetery's gone. I mean, that part is just, that I found out all this today. And I'm just amazed that memorials are wiped off the face of the earth so they could build a parking lot or build whatever.
So why didn't the government say anything to Howard's relatives? We went to the agency in charge of bringing our missing heroes home. It's called DPAA, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. and we met with retired Colonel Fern Sumter Winbush. We simply asked, why wasn't Howard's family told what happened?
They were shocked that we were the first people to tell them that the final resting place for Howard was a parking lot. Any reaction to that?
No reaction. The only thing I have to say to that is where we have found remains, again, in many cases, 70 plus years later, a lot has happened.
Do you think in the future similar families should know about what happened and the circumstances of where their loved ones are buried?
Sure. And I can't tell you why they weren't told that it was a parking lot.
Hopefully in the future.
Hopefully in the future.
Howard's family was stunned.
I mean, I think the government could have done a better job. I mean, it's like the records were lost. I mean, if this island was so important, why not have some recollection of it after the war? Let's go do something. Let's bring these guys home.
Documents showed the records were lost, detailing where Howard and hundreds more were buried. That's why they couldn't find him. Maps weren't well kept. The priority was building an American air base, winning the war. We asked DPAA if any new policies are now in place to tell families how their loved ones are buried. So far, no word on any changes.
His bottom teeth are looking good.
Yeah, that's his maxilla right there.
So, how did Howard make it home? Well, it's all thanks to these private anthropologists who had the will to travel to the island and stay there. They found Howard by taking old maps and putting them on top of Google Maps. That's how they're finding the fallen and forgotten.
There are deep family wounds from this war and from this battle in particular.
Hillary Parsons is one of the anthropologists back on Tarawa, and she's leading the excavation of more Marines found underneath the sand. Her team member, Madeline Vos, shows us where her colleagues found Howard.
There were Marines who were buried from essentially the building to here.
Yes.
Take me through it.
The first row is up in this area here. And then the second row is this kind of area here.
But Madeline isn't a government employee. In fact, she works for a nonprofit charity called History Flight. And History Flight is the group that found Howard, not the Pentagon. So where is our own government in all of this?
Is this a promise that's unfulfilled, all these Marines still on the island?
It's only unfulfilled in the fact that we can't just find all of them and bring them back in one very dignified return. We have to find them.
But finding them requires help from the Defense Department. And the help that is coming may not be enough, as these fragile graves are under threat.
Now, these graves are in danger because thousands of people cram onto this small sandbar and families build houses on top of American resting places. Up next, we'll tell you how the Pentagon had a real funding problem here and why it hasn't sent more help to bring our heroes home.
Welcome back to our special report, Fallen and Forgotten. We just took you to the island of Tarawa, right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's an important story for our country, especially today, the 74th anniversary of the World War II Battle of Tarawa. We still have 452 Americans who lost their lives on the island and never returned home. Most are still buried in unmarked graves, and those graves are in danger of destruction and desecration. Our Mike Valerio picks up the story from there.
I do remember when the telegram came. They made me keep it a secret until after Christmas. I mean, I was 4. Keep it a secret from my grandfather so he wouldn't be upset.
Nearly 74 years later, Judy Landry still remembers when her Uncle Howard was gone, lost on a faraway island in the shadow of colossal cannons. This is Howard Brisbane, a Navy medic killed in World War II. And this is where his family thought he was buried, under white crosses on the Pacific beaches of Tarawa. It's a place in the middle of the ocean where we fought the Japanese in November of 1943.
I remember one time somebody said maybe we could bring him home. And my grandfather said, no, he died once and that's the end of it. But it wasn't anything official. Again, I'm going to reiterate that I thought they found it in a marked grave that said Brisbane.
But when we visited Tarawa this summer, this was the reality. The contrast between here and Arlington is startling, and Howard's family described what we showed them in one word.
Deplorable. It's deplorable that, I think it's deplorable.
It took private donations to get this all started, so why didn't the Pentagon lead the effort?
There's only so much the government can do, but when there's expertise external to the organization, we got to find a way to bring them in, because it's less about getting the credit. I'm not concerned about getting the credit. I'm concerned about returning a father, a son, a brother.
It's all a question of money and resources, and the money hasn't always been there. We reviewed records from the Pentagon and found that funding for troop recoveries fell $15 million over the past 3 years.
Do you think that the dip has canceled any missions, has canceled contracts?
Oh, absolutely. We took a dip of about 35% of our operations we had to cut.
Yeah, here's another finger bone down here too.
Those cuts included excavations at a time when graves are in peril. Retired Army Ranger John Fry leads History Flight's team, and he tells us villagers have found and even thrown out American remains.
They dig wells, they dig trash pits. You know, they're constantly digging in their own yards, and many times they will turn up human remains, and they don't tell anyone. They just rebury them in a rice bag or something, or sometimes they just take them out in the lagoon and dispose of them.
In the neighborhood near the lagoon, History Flight found more evidence of Americans who are still in unmarked graves.
We recovered extensive partial human remains of the Marines that were originally buried there. Arms, legs, hands, feet, some bone fragments, things like that.
The contracts awarded by the Defense Department haven't been enough for History Flight to excavate everywhere. But there is good news. As of 1 month ago, funding for DPAA is up. A new operating budget of $131 million. The catch, not all of that is going to Tarawa.
There is a fine balance between where I send my resources. And so Tarawa families are important. So are my Vietnam War families. So are my Cold War families. And as I make the decision to send resources or to contract, bring on partners, it's a delicate balance. Every family member wants their case to be the one that I handle today. That's just not possible.
But 7,000 miles away, the work continues.
Go on.
We were allowed access in the middle of this new dig, where in the span of only a few hours, the team discovered not one, but 2 Marines below.
So this is inside the burial trench. I'm 6'2". We're about 4 feet deep under the ground here. The next Marine who's going to be recovered is to my right. He's underneath the blue tarp, and we could see him recovered as early as tomorrow.
After History Flight found Howard on Tarawa, his skeleton left the rusted wreckage of the island for the sacred soil of Arlington. Howard's family was there to see his return.
So where does this leave us now? Well, only a few days before this story first aired, the Pentagon emailed asking who was upset from Howard's family. DOD wanted to make this right. Well, I said it could start by telling Howard's family the truth about where he was buried, along with talking to other families who think their loved ones are still under white crosses. They're not. So far, there's no change in policy when it comes to what DoD says about these forgotten graves.
And after the break, we'll talk about what even set Mike on this path in the first place, how he heard about Tarawa. That's up next when we're back in a moment. We're back now, and I'm joined by Mike Valerio, our intrepid colleague who went to Tarawa to tell this extraordinary story about the fallen and the forgotten. Yep. And the goal, obviously, is to make sure that that is no longer the case.
Right.
How did you find out about Tarawa?
Well, you know, I started here at WUSA in February, and by March, I went to this burial at Arlington National Cemetery, and it was for somebody who was found on Tarawa. It was for Private Harry Ty, who was a Marine. Died, can you imagine, when he was only 21 years old? And Secretary of Defense Mattis was there. It was a very profound ceremony, the fog rolling over the hills of Arlington. And I remember I had Deborah Alfarone tag out the story by saying, oh, by the way, this man is not alone. It was a figure that I found out a few hours earlier from somebody at the ceremony, that 73,000 Americans are still missing from World War II. And when I sort of did the math and talked to an anthropologist who was there, that's the same as about 200 777s. You think of the Malaysia plane, think about 200 planes like that missing over the Pacific Ocean. And where's the outrage? There is none. It's an issue that's under the radar. So one of the anthropologists, Leslie, said, why don't you come to the island? And it was just an incredible experience. I told them I had to go because there was no way we could report on this from here in Washington. We had to see what it was like on the ground there.
And you knew a fair bit about Tarawa before you left, but when you arrived, it was quite an amazing scene, as you said.
Right, and I think the moment that I was least prepared for, and I don't know how you could prepare for it here, was seeing those bones and seeing how fragile they are and how in danger of desecration they are. Because when you see these bones that were once a person, once maybe a 17-year-old, a 19-year-old, 21-year-old, and they're just lying there in a pit.
So many stories in those bones.
You just think of who they were and how they are so close to the foundation of a home or a garbage pit or something that was dug up pretty close by. And it's a feeling of profound sadness and how vulnerable these remains are and how we really have to do better. So that moment, I don't know how anybody or how I could have prepared for that. It was absolutely the most moving moment on that island.
You spent nearly a week there working just on that story. You came back here, and the goal for you really has been to be able to get some answers for these families.
Make a change,
And to make a change.
Right.
So what's the sense of what will happen next as a result of this reporting?
So this is pretty important to identify and to let our viewers know. So the colonel who you saw, Fern Sumter Winbush, she is no longer in charge of that arm of the Pentagon. She was kind of filling in that role. And now there is somebody, Major General McKeague, who is in that role permanently, and he just took over about a month ago. So our goal is to interview him and ask Major General McKeague what policy is going to change about how these family members are told, about how their loved ones are buried and how they've remained for 70 years. And we are looking forward to that conversation. We are thinking it's going to happen December or January by the very latest, because there has to be some sort of change made. We were in the lobby of the Marriott Marquis downtown here in Washington talking to the family of Howard Brisbane, and they had no idea he was found like that. We told him, and that's not right. It should be the military telling these families how their loved ones are buried.
That is absolutely the goal.
Yep.
Our service members deserve that. Their families deserve that, and most importantly, our country deserves that.
Understatement right there.
Mike
Absolutely.
Valerio, great reporting. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie.
When we come back, the amazing story of a woman who reached out to Mike after his first piece aired, and a look at how you can help give these patriots a proper burial. Stay with us. Welcome back to our investigative series, Fallen and Forgotten. You know, our reporting took an unexpected turn when one of you at home first saw our story and told us you had a family member still missing from the Battle of Tarawa. Well, Mike went to interview that Virginia descendant, and he also shows us two major ways the Pentagon is falling down on the job when it comes to finding all of our missing from World War II.
When he joined the Navy and went to World War II, he was engaged to be married. You know, he had a full life way ahead of him.
Dewan Naprud is still waiting for her great-uncle Henry to be found on Tarawa. It's been nearly 74 years since he was killed in the Pacific, and we first showed you that a private team, not the Pentagon, is leading the effort to unearth the Americans of Tarawa, who are still missing in action.
The dead had done their job and they're in the ground somewhere and they just forgot about them.
John is part of the nonprofit called History Flight. His team members are excavating on the island, but they still need help from the government. Through our investigation, we found the Pentagon is failing in two critical areas, keeping people like Dewan waiting. First, 2 labs that analyze artifacts don't work effectively. That's according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO. Brenda Farrell is the GAO watchdog who first called for reform back in 2013. She says there's a lack of communication and duplication of work.
It's not clear which lab is doing what. It also can be inefficient. It's why do you want 2 labs doing the same thing?
On top of that, you would think there are files tracking each of the 73,000 Americans who are missing from World War II. Well, there aren't. Retired Colonel Fern Sumter Winbush told us in a June interview that a new file system is being built.
The challenge that we have is taking all of, in many cases, hard files, flat files, pieces of paper, and getting them into that system. And oh, by the way, some of that information is still classified.
The problems at the Pentagon slow down the process, and Dewan tells us she still feels like a part of her history is missing.
I just wish I had known him, because obviously I don't have any of those memories to share.
Do you have hope?
I do have hope, actually. I'm very much an optimist in it. It'll come, I think, eventually.
So many of you have asked how you can help History Flight, the nonprofit. Of course, it's now on the island. Well, you can go to historyflight.org or our special website for this story. It's WUSA9.com/fallen and forgotten. That will tell you how to donate, with History Flight's operations on average costing $8,000 each day. Also, if you have a relative who fought on Tarawa and they never made it back, chances are they are missing in action. There are no marked graves anymore anywhere on Tarawa. You can check our website for the island's MIA database and let us know if one of your loved ones turns out to be MIA as well.
Well, Mike, we thank you for your passion
Absolutely.
and your energy on this project, and we thank all of you for watching. Have a good night.
Good night.